Chapter 43. Et Terram. Outside the facility, rows of tanks poured out of the lake nearby. The Red Legion had used the outlet rivers to traverse here undetected from the ocean to the facility. As tanks drive out of the water, their cannons don't miss a beat, firing before the water even drains from the ends of their barrels. They lay down constant fire on a focal point of the wall, hoping to cause enough stress to the structure to make an opening. The tanks encircle the complex as more pour out from the water endlessly, adding a hellish roar to their barrage and intensifying it greatly with every passing second. Not only tanks are rising endlessly from the nearby lakes and rivers, but also the revenants, who march in single-file lines as they spread out around the permeator of the facility. Some rows carry nothing but one artillery round. In contrast, others carry nothing but waterproof sandbags filled with instant dry concrete. Then lines of anti-tank and artillery guns rose from the water, pushed and dragged like medieval battering rams by dozens of revenants on each one. At last, a tank rises from the water with Abaddon sitting on its canopy next to the main gun. Abaddon is still in his white adamantine straitjacket, but he wears a decorated admiral's trench coat with epaulets, aiguillettes, and countless badges over this. The coat sleeves hang off to his side empty, and the coat stays on by being buckled in the middle. Meteor bikes blaze over the surrounding forest canopy, shaking the trees like a hurricane on their approach. Pairs of four-armed abominations stitched together like Frankenstein's monster, they crew the meteor bikes, one acting as the driver and forward gunner, the other acting as a rear gunner and grenadier. The abominations have black chain net saddlebags filled with black skulls covered in Aether-Knight runes. Abaddon's eyes glow like the sun, and the red ring of plasma over his head burns a dark red. Inside the facility, the two rain gun pilots hop in the MK-142 and take off, rumbling into the sky and shaking all nearby structures. As they ascend, they have a clear view of the soldiers scurrying below, falling into formation, forming a shield wall around the great tree, with the Crimson Knights taking the high ground, serving as the vanguard. Trajan makes his way back to his troops to lead them. Andrew is caught up in the chaos and rushed to the front. Half the soldiers are given an Aether-Knight AR that fires the equivalent of a 50 cal round, and a sling to go with it. The other half of the soldiers are equipped with a light shield to give way for a second hydraulic arm that holds a 4-inch Aether-Knight mortar. They form Roman-like columns with 8 men in 2 rows. The 8 men in front have heavy shields and 50 cal rifles. The second file of soldiers holds their light shields above themselves, and the man in front of them, providing mortar support. The shields have swiveling portholes that hold the barrel of the soldiers' weapons in place while allowing them to adjust aim or degrees, like a bowl gun on a tank. The entire inner lining of the shields is a full-on heads-up display, leaving the soldiers' view of the battle unobstructed and crystal clear, while providing handy information such as bullet arch, degree, and trajectory. As for the Crimson Knights formation, they gather in 3 rows, making a shield wall around the facility harder to break than tank armor. The first row of knights have a Claymore Sawblade Super Heavy MG set and inserted through a side hatch on their massive 2-ton shields. Like the Planetary Guard, the second row of knights holds their shields over themselves and the man before them. They also have their guns facing up to serve as flak guns. Finally, the third row of knights has no shields but carries massive chain-fed howitzers like banners, and they lower them at an angle where their gun is almost resting on their shield brothers in front of them. This serves as artillery. With blazing spiked muzzles and their house banners, the knights stand in composed silence. Knight Captain Matrius stands at the forefront of his knight house, and Knight Captain Antony Dagazet does the same at the opposite end of the shield wall. The Planetary Guard's order of command is split up in 3s, with Trajan commanding 1/3, Yavik commanding another 1/3, and Hind commanding the last 1/3. Although Trajan is technically coordinating the other 2 commanders, and communicates with the soldiers telepathically. Andrew is in Trajan's section, under his wing. Trajan has the high rise lined with 20mm sharpshooters, and at the rear of the guard's formations are soldiers manning wheelbarrow-like contraptions rigged with railguns designed to drive nuclear bombs 2 miles deep for safe detonation to test the yields of atomic bombs. Andrew sees the contraptions, and for the first time, he looks at Trajan and attempts to communicate with him by asking the question in his head. Why do we have those? Trajan looks back at Andrew and pauses for a second. Trajan then replies telepathically, because they have nukes. Drake stands at the high-rise's foot with 2 claymore saw blades, one slung under each arm. At his side, he stands with a knight's howitzer. Meteor bikes begin to rain over the facility's walls, and the knights shred the oncoming airborne hordes. One meteor bike breaks through, crashing down on the knights' lines like a kamikaze. But before it hits, a knight manning a howitzer jolts his gun into it, jousting the 2 abominations off their bikes simultaneously as their meteor bike hits the knight's shield wall. The knights are unfazed as its burning wreckage tumbles over them, but lands on a column of Trajan's soldiers, killing them instantly. The knight with the impaled abominations on the end of his gun fires, sending what remains of their limbs in every direction. The black engraved skulls scatter from the wreck behind the knight's lines. The skulls ignite and generate more abominations in a flash of fire. The abominations generate from their hands fiery javelins. They hurl them about at the soldiers and knights, exploding on impact with an electrical fire like a lightning bolt, traveling with an FMG 148 javelin trajectory, steering itself into the air and down on its target. Trajan's anti-material sharpshooters made short work of the abomination's first wave, but still had taken on casualties. More and more meteor bikes break through, although none are operational when crossing the knight's lines. The maelstrom of wreckage scatters about the black skulls the meteor bikes harbored. Some knights and soldiers behind the lines begin to stomp and shoot the skulls, turning them to powder before they can become a threat. But this stops little, for the sheer number of them keep multiplying. Abominations begin to materialize left and right behind the lines. This starts to chip away at Trajan's forces. Not only are they growing in number, but they also can easily overpower a human with their unnatural strength. This becomes apparent as they physically shatter any normal human within their vicinity, crushing every bone of any soldier they come near with as little as a slap, planting their victim into the ground as gelatinous mass, if they don't just explode like they fell from the sky and hit bedrock. While the knights, on the other hand, can easily overpower the abominations. One even picks an abomination up with one hand and decapitates it with a quick squeeze, with as little effort as crushing an empty soda can. Sarah makes it to the top of the gyroscope. She clings on as the tree rocks back and forth from the cold front rolling in. She witnesses the MK-142 make its first pass, shaking the ground with its unworldly salvo on the other end of the wall. This stalls the Red Legion's advance for a few seconds. Sarah manages to reactivate the gyroscope, which explodes with a force field. Sarah holds on for dear life while the fast-expanding shimmering field strips the great tree of most of its leaves. Purple tree petals cascade onto the battlefield. The force field cuts the Legion off from airborne assaults. Abaddon's legions now must meet the Knights and Planetary Guard on ground level. Sarah cautiously makes her way back down. Trajan's forces clear up the remaining abominations. After that, they gathered their fallen but did not dare lay a hand on any corpse until they had shot them in the head with Aether Knight. But they cannot catch a break as a segment of the wall collapses, making a 12-foot wide opening not large enough to fit a tank through, but large enough to push revenants and artillery through. Revenants carrying only sandbags charge in and are immediately mowed down, but slowly and surely, a bridge made from body parts and fast-drying concrete starts to form and branch out like roots. These bridges slowly turn into trenches. The Legion begins to push the anti-tank guns through the opening. About this time, 3 more openings come about as the walls falter. But like the other openings, they need to be more significant to send vehicles through. Only Revenants and AT guns. The Revenants get mowed down as they push the AT guns to position. However, the artillery pieces do not lose momentum. For every Revenant turned to smoldering confetti, another one falls in line, immediately taking the place of the fallen. Once the AT guns are in place, they begin wearing on the knight's shield wall and frontal armor. Finally, the unthinkable happens. An AT round goes through a knight's weakened shield, hitting him in the chest, killing him instantly. When a knight dies, the nanites in their blood ignite like thermite, turning them to ash, and leave only their armor, weapons, and great helm behind. A fifth opening occurs. The rain gun comes in for a pass, shredding Abaddon's hordes surrounding the facility. But it does not take long for the legions to rise from the water and reform after the suborbital assault. 8 revenants are each given an armed nuke, with a timer set for 5 minutes, the lowest countdown one could be set on. They charge into the facility each through different openings. Trajan is immediately tipped off by the fact that the atomic bombs have just crossed the threshold due to the Geiger counter on the heads-up display of his shield. Trajan orders a breakthrough, with him leading the charge to take the nukes from the revenants and bury them far below the surface with his railguns. Unfortunately, they only have 7, and one team must work double time for them all to survive. Before they break past the knights, Trajan's sharpshooters fire hyper-compressed liquid nitrogen rounds into the moat below. The cryo rounds turn the water into solid ice on impact. All the planetary guards press forward, Andrew amongst them. The knights make openings for the columns of soldiers. Trajan is the first one through. Meeting a revenant head-on, he draws his custody arm and slams it down on the undead soldier's collar, almost splitting it in half. But instead of following through all the way, he uses the revenant as a standing tripod and unleashes the full brunt of his atomic blunderbuss, disintegrating every undead in front of him all the way back to the facility's walls. Trajan then follows through, cleaving the revenant in half. He then continues his charge alongside his soldiers. The knights reform their ranks and cover the flanks of the columns pressing on. The columns of guards track down the atomic bomb-toting revenants using their heads-up display. Trajan's soldiers begin to take on casualties at an accelerated rate, but this does not compare to what they are dishing out back to the Red Legion. So far, Andrew's column has managed to hold its own as it escorts a railgun. They then take out a nuke-bearing revenant and all surrounding undead. They then form a perimeter around the railgun as it is positioned, and the nuke is loaded inside and set. One by one, the column starts to fall, and by the time the railgun is fired, only Andrew and the railgun operator are left. They decide to go after the non-occupied nuke since they are the closest. Andrew reaches the nuke, but discovers it is buried beneath a thick sheet of ice. Apparently, someone had already hit the revenant that carried this nuke on its way in. Andrew points his rifle to the ground and cycles through an ammo chain to break enough ice to free the nuke. Bullets whiz past Andrew. One hits the railgun operator in his eye socket and he immediately slumps over. Andrew must now arm and set the railgun himself in the middle of this battlefield, without cover. Andrew notices he barely has a minute left till the nuke goes off. All other columns have just buried their nukes. Andrew gets through the first stage of arming the device when a revenant grabs him. Andrew goes for his sidearm, but the revenant grabs his right hand the second it goes to his holster. He then draws his flaming kukri blade on his belt and lobs off the revenant's hand, keeping him from drawing his sidearm. Andrew then follows through with a reverse grip stab at the revenant's neck, but the revenant catches this arm with its remaining hand. Andrew, who still had one hand on his sidearm, simply drew his pistol and unloaded it into the revenant's chest and face. This all happened in the blink of an eye. Next thing Andrew knows, a Hulk-like hand grabs him by the shoulder and stands him up almost like he was a toddler. It was a knight, and a group of them decide to break ranks and provide cover for Andrew. Andrew gets the railgun armed and fires it into the ground with only a second to spare. Under the cover of the knights, he makes it back behind the lines. Trajan simultaneously orders all his troops back behind the lines of the Crimson Knights. Once behind the lines, it was apparent that the Planetary Guard was whittled down. 2,000 strong, now roughly 200 battered. Trajan orders them to take up a post in the high-rise and use the high ground to their advantage. The 8 nuclear bombs are set off. The ground rumbles like an earthquake. Sarah was nearing the bottom of the gyroscope support atop the skyscraper when the earthquake knocked her off, dropping her 12 feet on the hard concrete below. Sarah's left arm, left leg, and 3 ribs are now broken. She pants with her eyes closed in pain and doesn't dare try to stand. The skyscraper continues to shake violently. Below, 8 geysers of raw nova erupt and cascade into the atmosphere. The MK-142 coming in for another pass must divert course to avoid this. The geysers suck up knights and revenants left and right like a tornado, hurling them into the sky. Because the revenants fight without self-preservation, they stay manning their AT guns, slaughtering the knights as they retreat. One great helm hits the ground after another as the Crimson Knights turn to dust after being shot in the back with anti-tank rounds, and there would be cold blood ignites. The knights are forced to fall back into the tower as well. The lines have entirely broken down. Everyone, including Trajan and Andrew, flees to the structure's safety, while Drake walks toward the chaos with a knight shield in his right hand, as he one-hands the knight's howitzer in his left hand. Drake activates a beacon, which signals Salem to bring him the Titan blade. Abaddon enters the facility and stares across the moat at Drake as if to provoke him. Drake fires on Abaddon, but as every round is about to hit Abaddon, an undead carrying the shields of fallen soldiers jumps in the way, acting as artillery sponges, getting annihilated themselves, but leaving Abaddon unscathed. Once inside, Trajan's forces secure every entrance of the skyscraper, as they had already fortified them in case of a fallback scenario like this. Andrew abandons Trajan's army in search of Sarah, making his way to the top of the structure as quickly as possible. Salem receives Drake's beacon. He makes it to the entrance of the skyscraper, but pauses before passing the threshold onto the battlefield, petrified at the sight of seeing knights flee. He closes his eyes, takes the Titan blade, and grips it close to his chest with both hands. Under his breath, he repeats to himself over and over again, Caelum et terram, Prometho ignis. Caelum et terram, Prometho ignis. Salem charges forward, miraculously avoiding harm, continuing to say the phrase under his breath. He nears Drake's position, dodging one shell after another. Salem finally reaches Drake. He drops to his knees and slides a few inches due to the momentum of his sprint, with his head down and arms extended out for Drake to take the sword. He yells, Caelum et terram, Prometho ignis. There is a bright flash above Salem. He slowly lifts his head to gaze up at Drake's, whose eyes now glow like the sun as a ring of plasma hovers over his head. Drake has a sudden change of composure, as if he is on autopilot like a machine, cold and inhuman. Drake drops the knight's howitzer and takes the Titan blade. Salem makes a beeline back towards the tower. Near the entrance, he slips and falls into the hidden passageway Andrew and Sarah had entered through. Oddly, the tunnel doesn't rumble or roar like the surface. While wrapping up the finishing touches for his Windlance mod, Orin lifts his welding hood and sees Salem tumble in, panting and panicking. Orin, the hell you doing? Having been occupied with reactivating the guns on the Windlance with Aether Knight capabilities, Orin was unaware of the battle raging above. Salem looks up to the entrance above. He sees that revenants cannot pass through the glowing water and walk over it like solid ground. Salem looks to Orin. You didn't feel any of that, Orin. Any of what? On the surface, Drake draws the Titan blade out high above his head. It glows like a fragment of the sun on Earth, the blinding light getting brighter and brighter with every passing second, while the facility trembles under the blade's divine roar. As revenants in their charge pass through the light, they are instantly vaporized, forcing Abaddon's hordes to give Drake a wide girth. Trajan sees this from the atrium of the skyscraper. Andrew arrives at the roof and sees the condition Sarah is in. He picks her up and carries her. Trajan tells everyone telepathically about this time to get to cover and brace themselves. Sarah in a panted breath. The vault, it's a panic room. She took a breath. It is designed to fall from orbit and she took another breath. If someone were inside, they would survive. It's the safest place on this planet. Andrew, are you sure it's safe? Sarah, even if it were hurled into the sun. Andrew bolts through the vault entrance, gently lays lays Sarah down and shuts the vault doors behind them. Andrew runs back to Sarah and begins to render first aid for her. First, giving her a pain sedative, he sets her arm and leg. There was little he could do about her ribs right now. Back down below, Drake still has the Titan blade raised above his head. He lets out a roar that shakes the facility. Drake, Prometho Ignis. Drake brings the blade down and swings it in a horizontal arch. Everything turns white. In low orbit, the MK-142 is coming up on Ethereal for another pass. They radio down. Come in, Inquisitor Hind. This is Red Tracer. 4 coming in on approach. Do you copy? There is nothing but radio static. The co-pilot continues. This is Red Tracer. 4 to Inquisitor Hind. Do you copy? The co-pilot changes the channel. Imperator Hyrock. This is Red Tracer. 4. Do you copy? No reply. He changes the channel again. Knight Captain Matrius. We are coming up on the TZ, target zone. Do you copy? The MK-142 begins to shudder. An alarm rings, indicating an extreme radiation spike. The co-pilot feels a warm light on his face. He looks forward, and his jaw drops. It was as if a solar flare was unleashed on the world's surfaces. This primordial force swept over the land like an atomic tsunami that reaches above the clouds, and the rain gun barreled straight into it. They try to change course, but it is in vain. The glass cockpit shatters. The downward-facing miniguns begin to glow red and melt away, dripping liquefied metal as the MK-142 drifts down uncontrollably into the atomic firestorm below it. Is as if being pulled into the sun. Everything fades to white yet again.